Simon, tell us about your journey and how you got. I mean, we actually heard a lot from you yesterday, and your amazing drive all the way up to COP26, which I was fascinated by. But there's something else you do apart from just looking after EV owners in Ireland.
I'm strictly speaking here representing the Irish EV Owners Association, but I also have my own business in this space called nextecocar, which is basically selling used EVs in Ireland, which I established as a startup in 2017. So I guess I have something to add to this conversation. But yeah, I mean, my background actually, I graduated in IT a long time ago, and I worked in IT for 22, 23 years. From being a software developer up through to project management. And I guess my two great passions in life are cars and technology. So that's what drove me in the end to start my business when I saw the opportunity to kind of do something that melded both things together. Strange journey. And obviously a lot of people I speak to in the auto sector who are selling vehicles have come from a completely different place to me, so I like to think I have a very different perspective on it.
Simon, forgive me, I haven't been to Ireland, but in my head, I just imagine it to be a beautiful place, nothing like Northwest London at all. So in a place like that, you moved to selling used electric cars. Now, it's hard enough for people to be selling regular used cars. There's not always the greatest of reputations there. How do you get people interested in a specialist dealing only in electric cars?
Yeah, well, it's been a challenge, I won't lie. I mean, I'm based in Dublin, and Dublin's not too different to London. It's a lot smaller, of course, but it's a big city with all of the things you'd be familiar with. So I suppose when I started out, we were, predominantly selling like the previous generation of Nissan Leaf and Renault Zoes and BMW i3s and these sort of cars that tend to have a shorter range. So these are perfect for commuters, right? So a lot of potential customers in Dublin and still for those cars. Of course, as you go further afield, then it can be more challenging. And certainly if you look at, in my presentation yesterday, I showed the map of the charging infrastructure in Ireland, which is pretty good on the East Coast where Dublin is, but kind of peters out as you go across, and there's a lot of work to do there. But in the last couple of years, since cars with greater range have started coming out, Ireland isn't a terribly big place. You go coast to coast, 250 kilometres, or down to Cork in the south, maybe 300 kilometres from Dublin, and same up to the north. So the sort of cars that are available now and that are coming into the used market for us are perfect for Ireland, to be honest. We probably most people would never need a 500 kilometre range car, although there's obviously that mindset, especially with people that live in the country, that they think they will. But I mean, I suppose one of the things, and talking about COVID is quite interesting, and whilst that's been a challenging time, I set up the business very much as an online platform. As a startup, we couldn't afford a showroom or anything like this, so we've customers all over the country. And I suppose one of the things that happened during the lockdown is that all car dealers had to start operating actually in that way, where you would order online and then you would click and collect, like you say, and we deliver all over Ireland. So that model has actually highlighted the fact to me, actually, as well, that I don't need a fancy showroom because it just gives you a lot of overheads, and people are becoming more and more comfortable with buying online as long as you can give the right information, and that's very much what we focus on doing, so that people understand when they buy a car from us what its real range is, not what the manufacturer says, how to go about using the charging network, what to do about maintenance, and all of these really important issues.
So do you find that that's a little bit of an education thing that you have, in not just selling the car, but actually educating the customer along the way? Are you finding a lot of first-time electric car buyers?
Absolutely, and I suppose, it's starting to change slightly now. Certainly when I started out the business in 2017, pretty much every customer that came was first time to EVs. So yeah, education is, and I believe remains, the number one important thing about selling EVs, and unfortunately it's not something that a lot of the regular car dealers and brands do terribly well, because they're coming from a completely different background, which is one of the benefits I bring to it. So yeah, it is a big challenge and I always start the conversation out as, and this come up in some of the conversations earlier about the LCVs. It's like, what are you going to use the car for? What are your journeys? What are your typical journeys? What are your occasional journeys? And then you can narrow down what the best options are. Of course, budget is a discussion point as well, but it's more about picking the right car for your needs, a lot more so than it was in the past.
The overall used car market right now, and I'm not just talking about EVs, but diesel and petrol as well, is a little bit in flux right now, isn't it? Because there's a huge shortage of supply of new cars. Used cars also are a bit shortage in supply because everybody's buying them. We have a unique situation where used car prices are actually appreciating rather than depreciating.
Yeah, I mean, and what's happened in the last year is crazy. Used car prices are up something like 30%. And if you look at EVs, used Nissan Leaf prices are up 50%. So it's hugely challenging at the moment buying stock. And yeah, the COVID had the effect of creating the processor crisis, and we're not out of that. And anyone you speak to in the industry will say we're probably due for at least another 6 months of that. So used car prices are going to stay buoyant, probably well into the third quarter of next year. Then hopefully things will normalize. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, we used to import almost all of our used vehicles from the UK. But Brexit has kind of put paid to a lot of that. So that's been a massive challenge from our perspective as well, and it's driven up prices even more so in the Irish market, which has made it a very challenging year, even with COVID aside.
And Simon, you've also had a lot of experience. You were in the IT industry before, weren't you? So how have you found the current level of interest in IT, and especially in relation to the EV world?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have a much broader sort of exposure to technology and IT than they did certainly when I started my career in the late 90s. And like you say, the sort of things you were describing there with Parkers, it's like that was quite cutting edge at the time, but now it's taken for granted. I think, as far as technology goes in relation to EVs, I mean, yeah, people are, if you look at, you just take Tesla, for example, I mean, it's almost it's as much a software platform as it is a hardware platform, and I think we'll see a lot more of that, and, some of the existing manufacturers will start to move away from that, and we see the amount of technology that we have in cars, and people expect to be able to monitor their car with apps when they're away to see what the charge level is and things like this. So yeah, I mean, it's very much taken for granted that you come with all these different aspects to your business, whether it be cars or anything else. You need to have a presence online across all the social platforms and have technology backing all of that up.
Especially when it comes to sort of the right people to build your team with. Have you found that, Simon? I mean, who works with you? Do they all buy into the electric vehicle concept?
Well, it's only myself and my wife, so yeah, she doesn't really get a choice. No, that's unfair. No, yeah, I mean, I think our philosophy is driven from the sustainability side of things as well, and wanting to see a better future for our kids in particular, and our grandkids ultimately, because you can't state it too seriously. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, and too many people don't take that seriously enough. So yeah, for me,
it's the middle of December, and I keep regretting bringing my big coat to this event.
I know, it was quite warm this morning. But yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, one of the reasons I changed from a bit like Lash, I wanted to do something that I felt had more meaning than what I was doing before. Not to say I didn't enjoy my previous career, but I reached a point, a crossroads, and I wanted to do something in the second half of my working life that I could look back on and say, hey, look, I actually made a difference, or I tried to make a difference. And it's like every time I put a new customer into an electric car, that makes me feel like I've done something positive.
So for you, it's not just a case of selling a car, it's converting somebody to a better way of living.
Yeah, it's as much a lifestyle choice, I think, as it is buying a car. And I think What we were talking about a minute ago is very interesting because, yeah, I'm obviously still selling cars for ownership, but I think there's one of the things when we talk about leasing and not owning vehicles and thinking about not being wasteful is you can't lease an older car at the moment, right? You can maybe lease a car up to 2 years old, and we generally lease cars for no more than 5 years. If we're going to completely move away from an ownership model of cars, what happens to those vehicles at that point in time is something that really isn't discussed at all. So because any car that's built today, realistically, the cars are so well built today, they last for 20 years. So what are we doing with all these cars at the end of their life if we're not going to sell them and everyone moves to a leasing model or a ride-hailing model and stuff like that? And we very, very much need to focus on not being wasteful and recycling, and this is all part of this circular economy idea.
And I think it's very interesting. Earlier, I think it was yesterday or the day before, there was a stat that had come up in one of the presentations, and I think that actually Volvo released this bit of information that building an EV, a brand new EV, is 70% more carbon intensive than actually just building a regular car. So you need 100,000 miles to actually recoup that. Now, you're dealing in used cars. Do you think that we should be heading in a direction where we look at the existing car park and go, right, you know what, let's not just get rid of them, let's convert them?
Yeah, I think there is, I mean, there's obviously some fairly low scale conversions going on at the moment. A lot of it is focused on classics and things like that, which is a cool thing to do, especially like converting some old Porsches would be fantastic, and people do already.
We've already had the conversation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that sort of thing going on, but it tends to be, you know, people who've got money to do these things. I think what we need to probably do, converting would be sensible, but I mean, there is a shortage of components and batteries and things like that. But putting that to one side, at the moment, people look at it on a one-by-one basis and go, okay, what's it going to cost me to convert that car? I think what you need to think about is how you upscale that and turn it into a production line. So what are the best-selling brands and models of cars, like Ford Focus, right? If you could build a factory and say, I'm going to convert Ford Focuses, and then you'd have a kit to do that. And this sort of modular idea of having the different components, you could imagine how you could do that on such a scale and in such a production line sort of way that it would become more a better cost. Because if you tell someone at the moment, okay, well, you could convert your current car, which is 5 years old, but it's going to cost you 10 grand, how many people are going to do that? They'd rather put that money into a new car. So, yeah, I think conversions is part of the solution, but the thinking isn't there. Yeah. You know, for me, I still enjoy to drive, and part of owning a vehicle is about enjoying having that thing to drive. And I think one of the things that I think will be really important moving forward and to actually get more people engaged with EVs is to build more cars that are actually much more interesting to drive. I mean, we've started to see some of those cars coming through, like the Porsche Taycan and obviously the Tesla models, but I think everything's quite utility at the moment. It's all very middle of the road, quite sensible stuff for the most part. So I'm personally excited as a car enthusiast to see more of those sort of vehicles coming through. And I think there is a great opportunity, like you said, for startups to be part of that model, because if we can have platforms that we can build something unique on top of, I think that will be a fantastic way of moving forward and having more unique vehicles.